Shabbat Shalom. In a relatively short statement issued on Martin Luther King Day a couple of weeks ago, the stated clerk for the Presbyterian Church USA, the Reverend J. Herbert Nelson II, unfortunately had this to say about the state of Israel. Quote, "The continued occupation in Palestine, Israel, is 21st century slavery and should be abolished immediately. Given the history of Jewish humble beginnings and persecution, there should be no ambiguity as to the ethical, moral, and dehumanizing marginalization and enslavement of other human beings. The United States of America must be a major influencer in calling this injustice both immoral and intolerable." And then he added, I would also hope that the Jewish community in the United States would influence the call to join the U.S. government in ending the immoral enslavement. Close quote. There are obviously a number of things that are very disturbing in Reverend Nelson's message. The first thing I would point out is that he delivered it only 2 days after a terrorist held Jews hostage in a synagogue in Colleyville, Texas. Reverend Nelson seemed at best tone deaf to make his remarks while the American Jewish community is itself being besieged, without even making reference to the obvious anxiety and distress that this incident caused. But it is important for us here in our community to know a few things about this statement. First of all, the Presbyterian Church USA, or PCUSA for short, is the largest but not the only Presbyterian denomination in the United States, and it represents approximately 1.3 million members. Second, as many of us know, the PCUSA has, unfortunately, a long history of issuing one-sided resolutions about Israel at their biennial assemblies dating back to at least 2004. That is how a group of Jews here in Houston reached out to a group of Presbyterians to engage in a long-term relationship so that we could provide a different perspective of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That relationship has been very rewarding for all of the members who have participated, including me. We have not always agreed on specific issues, but we have learned to listen and hear each other's perspectives and to understand in a deeper way that the conflict is very complicated. It is very painful on both sides, and it is not so easily resolved. If it were easy, it would have been done a very long time ago. We have also taken 2 trips to Israel and the West Bank together, and both were thought-provoking and powerful. And we turned a movement that sought to divest from Israel into a program to invest in the hand-in-hand schools in Israel. These schools promote joint learning for Arab and Jewish Israeli elementary through high school students. In other words, the hand-in-hand schools are a force for grassroots peaceful coexistence in the Holy Land. Although the national PCUSA has continued to adopt one-sided resolutions about Israel from time to time over the past 18 years, neither these resolutions nor Reverend Nelson's sermon reflect the entire PCUSA community. Aside from our group here in Houston, and others like it in many other cities all over the country, a group called Presbyterians for Middle East Peace was also founded in 2004 when the PCUSA first adopted those one-sided resolutions. Presbyterians for Middle East Peace are still an active voice, and they responded to the stated clerk's recent sermon with some pretty harsh language. In a statement that they published, they first pointed out that with all the injustices in the world, China, Myanmar, Russia, Saudi Arabia, to name a few, he wrote only of the continuing conflict between the Israelis and Palestinians. Yet while extolling Dr. King's call to unity on the one hand, he described the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians as 21st century slavery. Incredibly, his language seems to blame all Jews as the culprit, ignoring the many reasons why Americans support Israel. He dared to claim that Jews have forgotten their own history. This is working for unity, they asked? Gratefully, they continued, his actions and words do not match the work of local PCUSA and Jewish congregations in communities across the nation, including ours here in Houston. At the grassroots, Presbyterians work for justice alongside Jews, rather than engaging in polarizing polemics. If Reverend Dr. Nelson spent time with the American Jewish community, as locally based Presbyterians do, he would have known that American Jews are diverse and extremely concerned about what's happening in Israel and Palestine. He would also know that many live in fear of violence and that words matter. We hope the stated clerk will spend more time talking and working with the American Jewish community and less time writing blasts filled with reprehensible misrepresentations of our Jewish neighbors. And then in a follow-up statement from Presbyterians for Middle East Peace, they noted that even Americans for Peace Now, an organization that is frequently critical of Israeli policies, criticized the stated clerk's message. Americans for Peace Now wrote that his language evokes anti-Semitic tropes and risks further stoking hatred. It also harms efforts to pursue an effective peaceful solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. To solve a problem, you must first accurately diagnose it, and Dr. Reverend Nelson failed to do so. Now, my purpose this morning is not to add more fuel to this fire. In fact, I hope to try and do the opposite. I want to take this incident and focus on just one small aspect of it so that we can see that particular aspect as an example of a much bigger problem that we're having in our society today. And that particular aspect is this: how do we discuss important matters that mean a great deal to us on the one hand, but that can also be controversial and divisive on the other? As we all know, we live in a very polarized world today. We generally look only at sources of information that confirm our already deeply held convictions. Whether it's the news channel we watch, the YouTube personality we like, or whether other social media sources, many of us are hooked on watching and clicking the things we know we'll agree with. The Google search algorithms are designed to do this automatically for us. Once it sees that we click on certain websites or seek out some kind of opinions, it feeds us more of the same, so we all will continue to click more and more of them and further entrench our opinions of the world. The media, whether it's the news channel, the website, or the podcast, are all profit-seeking ventures. And to make a profit, they need to sell ads. And companies pay for advertisements because they have metrics. They actually have computerized metrics that can track how many people have looked at or listened to or watched a particular media file. And how do you attract more people to come and watch your show? Well, you need to be more flamboyant, more aggressive, more provocative, and in some cases, even more crazy. That's what gets people to take a look. And when they get worked up, and they pass their link along to a dozen of their friends, and they also take a look, and we all increase this cycle because the language is so extreme. It's so outlandish. And so we all get angrier and angrier at the other side because they don't see things the way we do, and we start yelling at each other and using the same extreme language that we just heard on our favorite media sources. And when we're assaulted by that extreme language from the other side, we get defensive. We shut our eyes, we shut our ears, and then we yell back. All of which accomplishes exactly nothing. Actually, it's worse than nothing. It creates enmity, discord, anger, hostility, and maybe even violence. The slogans, the sound bites, the epithets, the barbs, the words that trigger our opponents, we sling them like weapons at each other. In Reverend Nelson's case, the one word that stands out among all the other things he said that were inflammatory, the one word that really catches our attention, I don't need to tell you what it was. You already know. But I'll say it anyway. Slavery. Slavery? Really? The only reason for using that word is to incite a visceral reaction, but it's a slanderous use of that word. And it so utterly distorts reality that it only serves to inflame those who already hate Israel and to evoke anger in those who support Israel. And what then has it accomplished? Nothing. Actually, worse than nothing, because now neither side will talk to the other. We'll just continue to sling our verbal missiles at each other. So the first problem is the use of hyperbolic language that only serves to exacerbate division rather than solve any problem. And the second problem in our society's discourse today is trying to reduce complex problems to simplistic solutions. Gaza is blockaded. So the obvious solution is to have American Jews tell the Israeli government, end the blockade. Or maybe have American Jews tell the American government to force the Israeli government to somehow end the blockade. Simple, done. Except, of course, it's not so simple. The reason there's a blockade is because Hamas, a terrorist organization whose stated objective is the utter destruction of the state of Israel, has consistently used gaps in the blockade to import missiles, rockets, weapons, explosives, and cement precisely to destroy Israel. Cement? What's wrong with that? They need cement to rebuild the buildings destroyed in the last conflict, right? Well, we all know that much of that cement is routinely siphoned off, not to build housing or hospitals, but to build tunnels under the border that would enable the terrorists to enter Israel and cause murder and mayhem. And that's not an exaggeration. It's well documented. And the blockade of Gaza is only one small part of the conflict. Resolving the entire conflict is very complicated. 3 times Israelis have made efforts to end the conflict with fairly complicated details about land, security, the status of Jerusalem, and refugees. And 3 times, Palestinian leadership has rejected the offers without making a counteroffer. So now, putting pressure only on Israel to make peace is going to solve the problem? Both sides need to be ready, willing, and able to make peace. And unfortunately, right now, the bottom line is that neither side's leadership has the will or feels the urgency to resolve this conflict. The Palestinian leadership does not have the massive public support they need to reach an agreement that would be workable. But neither do the Israelis. Both sides will have to make concessions, and neither side is ready to do that. There's a huge lack of trust, a lack of faith, a lack of real understanding between the two sides right now. And one can say for good reason on both sides. There have been good reasons for a lack of faith on both sides. There are things that Israel could be doing to build trust for sure, but that would be a subject of a longer conversation than we have this morning. Right now, I just want to make the point that simplifying and really trivializing the complexity of the dispute is not going to lead to peace. And certainly pressuring only one side, that is Israel, and assuming that Israel could somehow unilaterally wave a magic wand and peace will appear like a bunny rabbit out of a hat is not going to be successful. So what do we do? In this morning's Torah portion, we find in Exodus 23:1 the statement, Lo tisa shema shav, which is translated in our Chumashim as, you must not carry false rumors. But for our purposes this morning, I prefer to translate it as, you must not promote false narratives. And specifically this morning, I'm thinking of 2 types of false narratives. The first is a narrative that may have a kernel of truth in it. It may be based on an element of verifiable fact, or maybe it's attempting to convey a real concern, but it's phrased in such a provocative and outrageous manner that it distorts reality. The Torah teaches us not to perpetuate these types of false narratives because they create great harm and they serve no useful purpose, and they will not lead to a successful resolution of any problem. They will only pour more salt in an already painful wound. So let's choose our words carefully and ratchet down the rhetoric so we can really listen to the other person's point of view. And the second false narrative is the one that tries to oversimplify complicated problems. These kind of false narratives promote simplistic solutions that will not work. So again, we need to have patience and listen to different perspectives. We need to see and evaluate the evidence, the sources that support our point of view and the other point of view. We need to be prepared to do our own research and present our own sources so that we can help clarify a situation. Combating this kind of false narrative begs us to think critically, to question each side's arguments, even our own, and try and put ourselves in the other person's shoes, to see the problem through their eyes. Only then can we be sure that we're not promoting a false narrative. To address both kinds of false narratives, we need to be able to listen more to each other, to stop the name-calling and the abrasive language, to put down our verbal swords and arrows, and see the humanity of the person we're trying to engage with. And this applies not just to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but to the political discord in our own society today, and even to conflicts within our families, or between coworkers, or even fellow congregants here at Beth Yeshurun. Lo tisa shema shav. Let's not promote false narratives. Rather, let's try to promote real communication, where each side feels they have been heard, and where true understanding can be fostered. And then perhaps we can reweave the shredded fabric of our society and find some common ground to solve the very real problems that we face together. Shabbat Shalom.